Hayom Harat HaOlam. It's one of the things we say on Rosh Hashanah. There is no more basic statement. Today is the birthday of the world. The simplest conception of the rabbis, that the creation narrative that began with Yehi Or, let there be light, happened today on Rosh Hashanah. Indulge me for a second. Think about your last birthday. Did you do something nice? Did you gather with friends and family? Maybe you received a great gift. I got 2 great books on home brewing. Thanks, Bettina. Fueling my latest obsession. So what are we supposed to do for the Earth's birthday? We can't really throw a get-together with family. Earth, I'm sad to say, is in a distant yet fixed relationship with its planetary siblings, only very rarely aligning. Its closest relative, the moon, has something of an approach avoidance conflict. Well, what about a nice gift instead? What could we do that would make a difference? This is not an idle question. We are in scary times. Never before has the impact of human life on the planet Earth been so clear. For those of you who are interested in geological ages and biology, you know that great extinctions happen every so often. Our fossil record testifies to 5 previous ones that have occurred. And every time, thanks to the action of evolution and the force for life that I believe is divine that we have on our planet, we get a new diversification of species. It takes about 1 million years to recover each time. Now, the greatest recipient of that action after the last extinction was humanity. Let's face it, we are the most fearsome species on the planet. Nothing comes even close. We are the apex predator in every single ecosystem. There is no species that does not fear us. You think we have a shark problem on Cape Cod? Do you know that an average of about 6 people per year are killed by sharks in the entire world? We kill about 100 million sharks every year. I think the sharks have a people problem. We are the best adapted to the planet's many climate zones and terrains. We have subdued the Earth, and we reside from equatorial jungles to the Arctic and all places in between. As our people understood in the creation story from the Torah thousands of years ago, we are the very crown of creation. As such, we have a special role and responsibility when we occupy the top position in the world's ecology. It is sad to say that we are just not living up to it. Many are familiar with the action of previous extinctions. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction holds our attention because that's the one that either a meteor or an asteroid impacted the Earth and wiped out most of the dinosaurs. That one we know. You know, these great die-offs happened 4 other times. The worst was the Permian extinction. About 250 million years ago, 96% of all species on Earth died out. 96%. From bacteria to trees, every animal that lives today is a descendant of the 4% that made it through the Permian extinction. Now, did I say it happened 4 other times? I meant 5. Because we're in the midst of another one. It's what we call the Anthropocene extinction. For you Greek scholars out there, you already know that anthropos means us, human beings. There is a growing consensus that we are living in the middle of another extinction event, one largely caused by our own hands. Overall, there has been a human-driven decline in the populations of all species on Earth by 25% in just the last 500 years. But not all groups have suffered equally. Up to 1/3 of all species of vertebrates are now considered threatened, as are 45% of most species of invertebrates. Among the vertebrates, amphibians are getting clobbered. 41% of their species are in trouble, compared to only 17% of birds, at least so far. The insects, don't ask. 35% of the lepidopteran species are in decline. Those are our butterflies. And that sounds bad enough, but it's nothing compared to the similar struggles of nearly 100% of Orthoptera. That's the crickets, the grasshoppers, the katydids. Even what researchers call charismatic fauna or charismatic megafauna, you know, the big, cute, beautiful, or otherwise striking animals are in trouble. Elephants, tigers, lions, pandas, rhinos. If you'd find its picture in a children's book about animals, it's probably in trouble. Not only do we hunt them, but we're eliminating their habitats, making it impossible for them to survive. Today is the birthday of the world. What are we doing? The World Economic Forum reported last year that if we keep on our current trend, there will be an equal weight of plastic to that of fish in the ocean by the year 2050. Happy birthday, world! We got you just what you wanted. Some more disposable shopping bags and polyethylene microbeads in our hand soap. We were so thoughtful that we even provided enough dissolved CO2 over the last 2 centuries to make our oceans 30% more acidic. We knew you weren't too fond of coral reefs and shellfish beds. How did we let it get this bad? And how now do we continue on a path that we know ends with our own extinction? Psychologists speak of a phenomenon called temporal discounting. So we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. Our minds as human beings are really good at considering the near future and considering the immediate consequences of our actions. We're really bad at considering the value of the future. If someone gave us the choice between getting $100 today or $110 next week, most people will accept the $100 today. We value the present a little bit more highly than we should. As human beings with long lives, we are constantly choosing between the value and quality of our lives right now against what they might be years or even decades in the future. It certainly affects our personal decisions, as has been well documented. We buy things on credit all the time that we really shouldn't. We want it now, and we discount the future value of the debt that we're incurring. Medical problems are often ignored. Hey, I can live with it. We discount the value of the crisis that will eventually force heroic levels of medical care in our future. There's a crisis in retirement savings. Only 26% of people in America have made any significant savings for their own futures, selling their own future value well short. This is human nature. The more complex the system, the more trouble we have correctly understanding the value of the future that's out ahead. And let's face it, as with all species, we are evolved for a very specific purpose. We're evolved in the short term to survive, to breed in the medium term, and in the long term to get our own progeny to breeding age. Then our program is over. We just happen to live a lot longer. And this is having grave effects on our national policy as well, because consistent discounting of the future in favor of the favor of the present is a recipe for disaster on a global scale. When we have to consider the future value of all human life against the value of ours right now, it provokes a crisis not only of politics and economics, but of the spirit. Will future generations look at us the way that we look at the slavers and exploiters of child labor in previous generations? Will they look back and say, how could they have been so short-sighted and blind? Well, it was economically advantageous for my few decades on this planet, so why worry about the consequences? The Scottish philosopher David Hume once wrote that reason is a slave to the passions. In the 18th century, the height of the era of the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, the very era that gave birth to the United States of America, he knew that human reason alone was inadequate as a tool for perfect knowledge. Our reason is inevitably guided by our emotions. Too often, our rational thought is used to prove what we want to be true in our hearts. Dan Kahan, a professor at Yale Law School, was the lead researcher on a psychology experiment that was published 4 years ago, and it confirmed the effect of our emotions over our reason. He designed a fairly straightforward math analysis problem. They gave a word problem, everybody's favorites, right? A new skin cream was brought out, and you were given a block of data. Those who took the skin cream, those who didn't use the skin cream, and the number in each box, those who got better, those who got worse, those who got better, those who got worse. Well, 59% of people, they couldn't interpret the data correctly at all. That's what we call innumerate people, people who don't have adequate math skills to understand the facts. Well, the 41% that could, that's where it gets interesting. The same problem was given, but they just changed the words around the numbers, and they made it into a problem about how do personal carry permits for guns affect crime. Same exact problem, rotating it back and forth. Well, with these numerate people, the people who had no difficulty getting it the first time, now their political beliefs came to bear. Half the people who answered it correctly blew it when the data contradicted their political beliefs. So as you can guess, if liberals were confronted with information that personal carrying of weapons lowered crime, half of them missed it. If conservatives were confronted with information that said personal carrying of guns had no effect on crime or it even got worse, half of them missed it. Equally effective. This helps us then, because it's easy now to think of almost any crazy idea, from a flat earth to doctrines of racial superiority, and look across history and see how every time reason was employed to find their merit. We just wanted it to be true. Today, we are confronted with another one of these crazy ideas. The idea that humanity is not responsible for the global effects of our own civilization. That somehow the despoliation of the environment, continuing to live out of balance with what the earth can sustain, is, well, who knows? We can't be sure. And even if we are responsible, well, the price is too high to do anything about it right now. Totally discounting the future cost of what will come. So what is the future whose price we are discounting so casually? We're getting a small taste of it with these superstorms coming more frequently. We saw Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, both horrific in their own ways. For those of you who have friends or family in Houston, you know what that flooding looked like. It was catastrophic. The initial damage and homelessness was bad enough, and now we'll have to deal with the lasting effects of highly toxic water, loaded with petrochemicals going everywhere. It may be a generation until we know the full effects of what happened. Irma, we saw, destroyed several island nations in the Caribbean, a Category 5 storm. Category 5 is defined as one that leaves nothing standing in its wake. Thanks to the amazing predictions by the climate scientists at the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center, Florida was spared widespread death. They got the path of the storm within about 40 miles, almost a week in advance, enabling Governor Rick Scott of Florida to do the admirable job that he did in pushing evacuations and giving pointed warnings to get people to get out of the way. Could you imagine what would have happened if he didn't do that? So I have to ask, why is the same man ignoring the climatologists who are warning of climate change, having gone so far as to forbid any state officials from even mentioning the words climate change? And so what were the chances of both these storms coming in 1 year? Well, Harvey was called a 500-year storm. Irma, the most powerful hurricane ever recorded, was a 100-year event. So what are the chances of a 500-year event and a 100-year event happening in the same year? Well, when we say it's a 500-year event, what that really means is there's a 1 in 500 chance of it happening in any given year. A 100-year storm is a 1 in 100 chance of it happening. Now, for those of you who have blocked out middle school math, if I take a quarter and I flip it, what are the chances that it's heads? 50%, 1/2. If I take that same quarter and I flip it, what are the chances are that it's heads? If I take that same quarter and I flip it again, what are the chances are that it's heads? 50%. We got it. Now, if I hold that quarter in front of you and I say, what are the chances that I flip it 3 times in a row and it's heads every time? 1 in 8. Very good, Bryce. 12.5%. Okay. So that means if we take the 500-year event and the 100-year event, we've got a 1 in 50,000 chance of that happening in 1 year. Are you listening now? 1 in 50,000 only if the climate hadn't changed. Now we've had another storm come since I wrote this. Another 1 in 100-year storm. So now it's 1 in 5 million. Are you listening now? Well, what about global temperatures? The top 10 hottest years on record have all occurred since 1998. People here can attest to the reality of Cape Cod in the 50s and 60s because houses were built without air conditioning because you didn't need it. How about now? Massachusetts, since the first Earth Day, that's only a period of about 40 years, our temperatures here have gone up 2.7 degrees on average in just that time. We can see the effects on the polar ice caps. The Larsen ice shelf is breaking apart in Antarctica. A chunk, the area of the state of Delaware, broke loose this year, only 3 years after the first crack formed. This shelf is kind of like the cork in a bottle on Antarctica, containing major glacial flows that, if unimpeded by that ice, will go right into the ocean. We're seeing similar activity in Greenland. NASA satellites are monitoring it, and it isn't pretty. If the ice on Antarctica and Greenland melts and enters the oceans will rise so high they will come up to the left elbow of the Statue of Liberty. Last week, China announced that its ship, the Zhuilong, or Snow Dragon, traveled for almost 2,300 nautical miles across the Canadian Arctic. The Northwest Passage is now open for business, friends. Happy birthday, world! The effects are unfolding according to many of the climate model predictions, and unfortunately, they're coming along the worst-case scenarios. So what's our response? First, we must recognize the limits of our personal knowledge. We have a troubling tendency to disregard or even denigrate expertise in America. I know the very real and severe limits to my own knowledge. Where's Elaine Singer? I saw her earlier. She asks me every year, there she is, for advice on the flowers, and every year I have to say, I don't know enough to give you any advice. You're going to have to do that on your own. That's why I asked you. My wife can tell you, does this look okay? I can barely dress myself. Every year I live, I realize more and more how little I know. In a world that multiplies empty opinions on the internet and cable news, it's very easy to forget that most of these talking heads are utterly unqualified in their opinion giving. Let's face it, if you needed someone to interpret an MRI picture, would you want a radiologist or someone who looks good on camera and is forceful in her viewpoint? I'm going to take the doctor myself. So why do we trust the same people with no particular education or expertise to inform our opinions on the most critical issues of the day, at the expense of the very experts who actually know more than we do. I don't care if they're telegenic. In thinking of the professional opinionating class, I'm reminded of one of my father's favorite quotes from Upton Sinclair. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson is the director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City, a real-life astrophysicist. He is the inheritor of the mantle of his mentor, the great Carl Sagan, as explainer-in-chief of science to the American public. He pointed out this summer something very interesting about the power of scientific predictions. How many of you enjoyed the eclipse this summer? Did anybody go someplace where they could see it? Awesome. My kids made pinhole cameras so that we could see part of it from the front yard. It's amazing how you could show up at the right location at the right time, and the eclipse happened exactly the way the scientists said it would. Why? That's the power of a consensus model based on extensive observation and refined when they make mistakes. That's how science works. It sure worked for that eclipse. 97% of climate scientists are in consensus about the effect of humanity on the Earth's climate science. There is no question. This is how science works. And the people who hold the expertise have opinions of much greater worth than mine. I choose not to be so vain as to think I know more than the climatologists about the climate. Our first response to this crisis has to be believing the peer-reviewed and tested scientific observations placed right in front of us. Shame on us if we are so vain to think we know more. Well, science can also help us to formulate appropriate behavioral steps. One of my favorite writers, Isaac Asimov. Any other science fiction geeks out there? I'm almost afraid to put up my hand right now. Yes, I read a lot of those books. Well, he's actually important not just as a writer of fiction, he was a scientist himself, but he wrote what we call hard science fiction, taking a look at what might actually happen, thinking it through. And he wrote 3 rules for the development of artificial intelligence that shine great light on correct living. 75 years ago, in 1942, before there was a transistor or a glimmer of what we might think of as a computer, Asimov was already concerned with artificial intelligence. He had already imagined a future in which robots, guided by artificial intelligence, were commonplace. And so he came up with some essential bits of code that had to be included in all of them, what came to be known as the 3 laws of robotics. By the way, robotics was also a term he invented. Make sure that they don't get out of hand, that they don't take over, or ever hold themselves as being superior to human beings. They are now seen in the field of artificial intelligence as axiomatic. You can't do artificial intelligence without these rules. The first law, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Oh, sounds pretty good. Anybody driving a self-driving car yet? That's the first robot most of us are going to be coming into contact with. We better hope that they have that one in there. The second law, a robot must obey orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. We don't want any killer robots out there, right? The third law, well, a robot must act for self-preservation and protect its own existence, as long as doing so doesn't conflict with the first or second laws. This is axiomatic for artificial intelligence. So why should we care about robots, and why am I talking about them? Are they taking over yet? Not quite. But pause for a moment and think, because we can understand Asimov's robots as idealized human beings. In effect, humanity's children, created to serve our purposes. As Jews, we can see this very easily by substituting Jew for robot and put it all in the context of mitzvah and our Creator. Instead of a robot, we've got people, And instead of people being the creator, we have our God. Here's how they would sound. Jews may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being come to harm. That's actually halakha. Okay. Jews must obey mitzvot given by God, except where such mitzvot would conflict with the first law. That is also halakha, what we call pikuach nefesh, the preservation and saving of a life. You can do almost anything, break almost any mitzvah, to preserve a human life. Jews must protect their own existence as long as such protection doesn't conflict with the first or second law. This is also halakha. We are told to preserve our own lives at the expense of any Jewish action except for any three prohibitions. So we're right there. We're right there. So we can get to a common and acceptable understanding of our obligations to each other and to God just by hammering out the fine details. But it gets trickier when it comes to collective responsibility and destiny. In a later story, Asimov introduced a conflict. There was a robot that no longer seemed to be following the three laws, which should have been impossible because they were coded right into its intelligence. Well, it turns out that the robot, much as the rabbis did and do with the Torah, had intuited a higher principle that must be obeyed, that was implied by the other laws. Since it preceded the first law, it came to be known as the Zeroth Law. A robot may not harm humanity, or by action or inaction allow humanity to come to harm. We can put this into our Jewish terms as well. For us, a Jew may not harm humanity, or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. We have the principle of Bal Tashchit in the book of Deuteronomy, the mitzvah to never needlessly destroy any living thing, from an ant to a tree, a bird to an elephant. These things have a right to exist. And those who unthinkingly destroy are sinners. What could we possibly make of us collectively now, as we unthinkingly destroy an entire world? After the Second World War, Emil Fackenheim proclaimed the 614th mitzvah. Thou shalt give to Hitler no posthumous victories. Perhaps it's time for us today to declare a zeroth mitzvah. We may not harm humanity, or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. Our time is past to have silly arguments trying to contradict or deny reality. We are already forced into a place of planetary triage. How can we best respond to what's already happening and keep it from getting too much worse? Because even if we changed our ways today, it would carry over. The emotional temptation to discount the value of the future must be rejected, along with leadership that voices such claptrap. They are out of step with the vast majority of Americans and the rest of the world. To those who say it will be too expensive for us to act, the cost of inaction is too terrible to contemplate. What can we do now? Available actions are all around us. Take a look at the roof as you leave the synagogue today. Our Cape Cod synagogue roof generates 96% of our electric need. We did that together, and it's happening all over the place. The town of Barnstable is installing more and more solar, picking up its needs. Cape Towns and others in Massachusetts are banning plastic bags. That's something we did together. Small steps of progress. What else can we do? Maybe we should stop buying water and beverages in plastic bottles whenever possible. Really. Metal and glass are recycled at an 84% rate. It's not so good with plastic. Make sure you have your own shopping bags. There's no reason not to. We who live here on the Cape, we need to get behind public sewerage efforts in our own towns. I don't want to talk about it right now because it's kind of disgusting, but what our effluent is doing to the waterways of Cape Cod is very, very bad. Our vehicle choices matter more than ever. Thanks to efficiency gains, most of our oil in this country is now used for transportation, not power production. We need to better distinguish between our needs and our wants. Now, these are small and important efforts on the local level. But even more important is to embrace the changes in our way of life that the Zeroth mitzvah will mean. No society is granted heavenly permission to persist in its ways. Something new will come, and we would be wise to embrace it rather than to resist it. When Adam first entered the Garden of Eden, the Midrash tells us that God instructed him, "See my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. And everything that I created for you. Be careful not to spoil or destroy my world, for if you do, there will be nobody after you to repair it." There is no one coming after us. We are at the very point we were warned of. Happy birthday, world. What can we do for you on your special day? It's a question we best be asking ourselves every day. Shana Tova.